So tonight we continue our walk, our mountain stroll through the Blue Cliff record. And so we go straight to case 2, which lands exactly in the right place for day 2 of session. You notice the way that koans meet you in the right place at the right time, if you are awake to that fact. So here it is. I'll read the case. It's called Zhaozhou's The Supreme Way. Zhaozhou addressed his assembly and said, and he was quoting, "The Supreme Way is not difficult. It simply dislikes choosing." Then he says, with even a few words, there will be delusion or enlightenment. This old monk does not dwell in enlightenment. And another translation of that is brilliant clarity. Does not dwell in brilliant clarity. Then he asks the most valuable question. He says, can you value this without reservation? There's a second part to the case. A monk stepped forward, a brave monk. It's always a good thing to step forward with a question on your heart. A monk stepped forward and said, if you do not dwell in enlightenment, how can you value it without reservation? Zhaozhou said, I don't know that either. The monk said, if your reverence does not know, how do you say that you do not dwell in enlightenment? Zhaozhou said, your questions are well asked. Make your bows and retire. So that's the case. And I guess why I find it to be exactly the right time in session to take up this case is because this is the time to begin to turn towards self-inflicted suffering. All our own work, that kind of suffering. But not just the fact of suffering that we can so easily inflict upon ourselves, but the wise medicine of healing that suffering, of not knowing so much about all that is so not right. So what is it to know less about this not right state of things? What is it to resist less? What is it to offer little or no resistance to the way, the circumstance as it presents? So not knowing is this tender turn back. Remember I spoke last time about turning yourself around to confirm your own self-nature. Not knowing is the tender turn back towards we could call it the unconditioned mind and heart. Dogen actually had a phrase for this that's very resonant and everybody knows this phrase. He called the great matter one continual mistake. And there's a beautiful sense in which Dogen is speaking about life itself. But better than that, he's asking us to notice this life as it flows. The way that we can, at that point, as we catch sight of the current of life, that we can find ourselves turning against it and notice in time to say, not that way. So one continuous mistake is a confirmation in a way that we cannot control a single thing, that impermanence is the only permanent aspect of this reality that we share with all other creatures, beings and forms. Everything passing quickly away, mountains a little more slowly than us. So this sense of catching ourselves in the act and being able to say, not that way, Not that standing in the way, placing the self, a fearful self, let's face it, a fearful self in the way of life as it is calling on us. So not knowing is wise enough to dislike all such choosing. Choosing in the sense of opposing, resisting, preferring, having preferences, having alternative universes to the one that we are currently enjoying or that is enjoying us. That beautiful phrase of Yun Men, medicine and sickness heal into each other. That's in play here. The sense of the way that the slight disjunctive state of picking and choosing, the gradually destructive state of picking and choosing, the standing apart and the allowing it to alienate us from the very breath we're breathing. That can heal over with the medicine that can completely meet and resolve this old human sickness. What is it? It's not knowing. It's standing open to what is and what is happening. So at that point, this unease, this dis-ease, this uneasy quality of human beings, it can heal over just the way the wake of a boat heals over in the water and disappears, leaving no trace or very little. And even that very little trace is a no trace in the end. We continually leave the way clear behind us. We turn, that's another whole talk, but we turn to remake what needs remaking, to bend to circumstances. But in the meantime, this choice of not choosing, of not knowing, of not supposing, of remaining open and attentive instead, and doing so while meeting even difficult circumstances as they come to meet us, just as they are. Zhaozhou, the great Taoist teacher earlier than Buddhism in China, spoke of the mind of holding all things equal. Look at the generosity of this, look at the kindness of this, the open quality of the heart that can hold all things equal. Very close to love. So, this great statement, which originally, of course, is Shito's words, Shitao. The supreme way is not difficult, it simply dislikes choosing. I'm reminded of the words I once heard Pema Chodron offer about this matter. She said, Nirvana is just what is happening, minus your opinions about it. And that's a lovely offer of the sort of kind, stripping away quality of disliking choosing, of not preferencing, of letting opinions drop away. What can be seen when the opinion is not in front of everything? Well, everyone has an experience of this. If your zazen at any point becomes clear and deep, like water, with no front, no back, no better, no sense of the possibility of better or worse, no sign of that. A deeply settled kind of state which is increasingly transparent to reality. just simply reflecting it like a mirror that rejects nothing. That state, that is a taste of this simply, the active form of simply eschewing, choosing, picking and choosing, and holding one thing as preferable to just what is happening. So, what does this look like? Well, one thing it looks like is sesshin mind. What a strange coincidence that this is actually what we practice here in sesshin. This sense of, a sense really of reality less burdened by opinions and choices. A sense of just what's happening is enough. It's enough. We keep discovering how enough it is. When we do formal meals, excuse me, we have the mind there of just enough at every point, just enough. And that's very close to this mind of simply disliking choosing. If there's just enough, what choices are there left to make? If nothing is missing now, what can we do with that except completely be it? So there's Anna Sphere, the Polish poet, a poem of hers that sort of touches this delicately and very simply. This state of receiving what is on offer. She calls it priceless gifts, and she says, an empty day without events. Now, what can you hear in events? Can you hear a degree of colliding with reality? Can you hear a degree of having a choice that didn't match reality? So, an empty day without events. And that is why it grew immense as space. And suddenly, happiness of being entered me. I heard in my heartbeat the birth of time. And each instant of life, one after the other, came rushing in like priceless gifts. Can you hear what happens when resistance lifts just in those words? So the supreme way is not difficult. It simply dislikes choosing. Now in that word simply, you can probably hear a lifetime of practice, of coming into deeper and deeper accord with reality. Realization means becoming real, touching what is real, being completely confirmed that way. So, simply dislikes what? Simply dislikes dividing what is essentially whole, what is undivided by nature, what is seamless and utterly interconnected by nature. Why rupture that? Why disturb that? Why trouble that? Well, we know how to do it all too easily. And hence we have a practice so that we can catch sight of how we trouble the very moments of our lives with opinions, with preferences, with picking and choosing, disliking and rejecting. So the Supreme Way simply dislikes will have nothing to do with that dividing, that if you look at the words simply dislikes, the way that how easily we can simply dislike what life is presenting as what is, in that simply disliking, isn't that the very source, the very originating point of what is identified as the poison of ignorance. To simply dislike what is, it's ignorant in the extreme. It is a rejection of what is real, what is here. So, let's look at Shitao's statement a little more closely, which Zhaozhou revered and offered many times in his 40 years of 40 years of teaching. From the age of 80 onwards, he waited till he was ready. Actually, he waited until people finally tied him down and said, "Do it, teach, please." So, the Supreme Way is not difficult. Why is it not difficult? Because it is most natural. It's the most natural way. The natural way opens as we stop and cease resisting. And that means resisting what is presenting. Resisting it as in disowning it, refusing its present clear reality. Moving off, hoping for an alternative universe. Any minute now, it could arrive. So the Supreme Way is not difficult. It has no resistance at all. That is the way, is that not describing the way of ease itself? No resistance. Doesn't mean no clear touch of reality. It doesn't mean things to be done, no things to be done and nothing to be considered, no. But the impulse to not resist, to include the offer of the moment as completely as you can. That's what I mean by not resisting. That's what I think Shita means by simply disliking choosing. You know, choosing is, that's terrible. I want this, I don't want that. That's nasty. This is better, and so on. An even more subtle version of it is something I once heard an indigenous North American man say, an Inuit man. He said, as a general rule, don't point at mountains. Don't point at mountains. I think there's something beautiful there, a beautiful protocol of mutuality. Why would you point at a mountain? Why would you interrupt the mutuality of mountain and you by pointing? Can you hear the force of imposition of self in that pointing? A certain subtle carving out of something in the universe. Don't point at mountains is also saying from a very deep place, respect. Offer respect. And to offer respect, you don't point at things in the offering of respect. You're much more likely to do this, to yield. You know, when you're facing a mountain, as we walked up to do the other afternoon, we come into the presence of the sight of that mountain in the form of you are. Therefore, happily, I am. You, mountain, are. I am. So, So Zhaozhou goes on to say, with even a few words, there will be delusion or enlightenment. Listen to the word or there. Listen to the picking and choosing in that word or. And he went on to say, this old monk does not dwell in enlightenment. So surely the moment a few words are spoken, picking and choosing begins. It's the very nature of words to single things out. And of course, it is the very nature of human beings to communicate with words, to share consciousness with words. So words themselves are marvelous matter, mysterious matter. How can sounds carry this great freight of meaning and precision and connection and poetry and beauty and drama and sorrow and joy and all the rest of it? At the same time, what this is pointing to is the falling into a dualistic mind. Words pull us in that direction. They do. Poetry is the great resistance to that pull. And so are koans made of words, utterly resisting the pull of dualism or dualistic mind, utterly opening the path of non-dual mind, which of course Zhaozhou is talking about. The supreme way that simply dislikes choosing has drawn back from this dual, dividing impulse of mind. And then he asks a beautiful question. Zhaozhou asks this question. He says, can you value this without reservation? This plain, complete reality that is living your life, that your life is living. When he says this, you must listen for the not to quality of that word. This embraces the, let's call it the absolute or the inconceivable, right in every detail of the evident reality. So, this in that sense, this mind of not to, and even less than one in the end. Can you value this and all that comes along as this, including suffering, including sorrow, including mortality, including the loss of everything we love, including watching the world that we love, the planet that is so extraordinary, be treated like shit a lot of the time, turn to shit. So this brings with it the whole beautiful obligation to meet the whole of it, to meet without picking and choosing, to find the depth of being that can hold the whole of what is happening, to turn towards the whole, not the preferred and not even happening possibility, to not replace what is happening with our dreams about how it should be, to not replace the reality, which is our most intelligent capacity, is to meet reality completely. There's a interesting moment when he says, and I think the monk finds this, or the monks listening obviously find this very almost alarming, when he says, this old monk does not dwell in enlightenment. Now,
sorry, Susan, I didn't catch that.
Does not dwell in enlightenment,
okay.
Right? So, what would it be to dwell in enlightenment? Wittgenstein had, he managed to conceive of a completely perfect world. It was a marvel, a thing of the mind that was truly marvelous. He was deeply impressed by it, and probably by himself in creating it. And he very honestly attempted to take a single step inside, mentally take a step inside this perfect world. And what he said, and freely confessed, is, I couldn't find a single foothold. I couldn't find traction. I fell over flat on my face immediately. Without traction, without the traction of what we might call suffering, we might call it experience, we might call it this, just as this is happening. Without meeting that completely, who would we be? What kind of delusory dream would we be? What kind of dwelling in enlightenment would be tolerable, and for how long before it was a very stale delusion? But even more deeply than that, Zhaozhou is saying include exactly the world as it is. There is no other world. There is no elsewhere. So can you value this, the whole of it, without reservation? Isn't that the great ask of our practice? To be able to concede, to trust in and give yourself completely to the whole of being here in a mortal body with an unlimited reach of consciousness. To be able to live the not-to quality of this, to dare to do that, but also to let it refine you more and more fully. And at the very simple level, it's asking, can you choose what is? Can you be congruent with circumstances, even difficult ones? And can you begin by welcoming even difficult matters and discovering what is happening? And in welcoming and meeting, is that not the lesser suffering than opposing and preferring and hoping for the parallel universe to begin? Zhaozhou was asked about this when someone came asking, when difficult times come to visit us, how should we meet them? And he replied just with that one word, welcome. Welcome. Now it is saying include, completely include. But it's also saying count the difficult times as welcome. And so the fearless quality of this, trust that Zazen builds this fearless quality. It is the practice over and over again of accepting, of including, radical inclusion of just what is happening. That's what we practice. That's what we lend ourselves to here in this space of practice. And cherish the fearless quality of it. Fearlessness grows fearlessness. The second part of the case has that monk coming forward. And as I said before, welcome that impulse to come forward with a strong question, a genuine question. And it lets us see this fearless enough monk come forward, but he brings his choosing mind with him very strongly. I'll remind you what he does. A monk stepped forward and said, if you do not dwell in enlightenment, how can you value it without reservation? Can you hear the either-or quality here? Persisting as it does through all kinds of critical thinking, analytical critical thinking, to be a very valuable propensity of the human mind, in which we are highly trained, in fact. But what place does it have in the face of Zhaozhou, offering the supreme way that simply dislikes choosing, and not only offering it, but embodying it right throughout this encounter? And here it is. Zhaozhou says, I don't know that either. I hope you can hear how he gently, constantly turns this monk around towards not knowing in this encounter. And the monk then comes forward, completely missing that offer, and says, if your reverence does not know, how can you say that you do not dwell in enlightenment? Now, this is a logical question, utterly grounded in either or mind. Zhaozhou says, your questions are well asked. Make your bows and retire. How beautifully that works, you know. How this is always Zhaozhou's way. He is always meeting the other, the monk, the person presenting. Sometimes it's a nun, in fact, and an old lady in another case. But in every case, he meets them completely on all the levels in which they might be approaching, and all of them at once. He's a master of this, the generosity, the flexibility, the creativity, and the presence of not no mind. So Zhaozhou's no enlightenment, that's a Dharma gate. I invite you to look into it really deeply. Why is no enlightenment so much infinitely more valuable than something called enlightenment? Don't move into either or mind in examining the question. Both and. You must approach with both and, not two mind. And of course, not falling into delusion or enlightenment. There it is. This is living in the presence of the continuous mistake, the continual presentation of just what is happening, just as it does in all its gnarly form. It's meeting it willingly, and not falling into delusion or enlightenment is the only place that can clearly hear the cries of the world. We spoke at some point this morning of Kanzayon, who hears all the cries of the world, in fact, even more deeply, cannot but hear all the cries of the world. Completely open. A completely open state. It is not knowing mind. That is the completely open state. And if we cannot hear the cries of the world, we fail to hear their call on us. And that's where the traction begins and confirms the value of being here and offering all that we are. As for not hearing the cries of the world, years ago I had some very strange neighbours in the house next door. It was a big enough house to hold a lot of these strange people. And they were a kind of cult, not like us. Very not like us, actually. They were followers of someone called Sister Claire Prophet. Okay, you've heard of Sister Claire. So they did practice meditation. They also opened their services with our national anthem, but also the American national anthem. I guess that's, not picking and choosing of a certain kind, or else it's picking and choosing far too much. But anyway, here's the point. There was one time when the daughter of one of the members of this sect, who I loved her, she was a dear little kid, and I suddenly realised she was out in the front garden crying her head off. And the people in the house, deep in their meditation, completely ignored, almost programmatically failed to respond. I went over, I comforted her, I brought her over to our place and looked after her until their important meditation was over. But it's a way of seeing how absurd it is to in any way try to license some kind of particular right of absence from the simple fact of the world and its call on us. So that beautiful, I don't know that either, he leaves himself wide open. And don't miss the joy of that openness. Don't miss the joy of it. There's another case I'm not going to go into in detail, but again, Zhaozhou is asked by a monk. It's case 9. I've got it here to get it exactly right. Case 9 of the Blue Cliff record, Zhaozhou's 4 gates. So a monk asked Zhaozhou, standing in front of him, what is Zhaozhou? Lovely question, actually. Zhaozhou replied, East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate. Now, he's playing with the fact that he takes his name from the town where he is as well. And that town had 4 gates. And what he's saying with this is every gate open, every gate wide open. Nothing in the way. Enter anywhere. What is Zhaozhou? Enter anywhere. And there's a real heart quality to this opened heart. So, what does this open state look like? Well, there's a poem from Marie Howe, who I got to know recently in a kind of very large gathering on Zoom. And somehow we got to know each other very well in the course of a very large Zoom gathering. She was presenting her work, and I love her work. So this poem is called Reunion. And of course, every time we tend away from picking and choosing, we're tending back towards reunion, complete reunion. So here's the poem, Reunion. The very best part was rowing out onto the small lake in a little boat. James and I taking turns fishing, one fishing while the other rowed slowly, the long sigh of the line through the air, and the far plunk of the hook and the sinker, lily pads, yellow flowers, the dripping of the oars, and the knock and creak of them moving in the rusty locks. That's it. Is that not enough? So I'd like to wrap this up by looking at Zhaozhou's verse that he attaches to the case of Zhaozhou's The Supreme Way. So first I'll read it, and then I'll read it more slowly. One has many kinds. 2 have no duality. At the horizon, the sun rises, the moon sets. Before the balustrade, the mountains deepen and the water chills. When consciousness ends in the skull, how can joy exist? So, One has many kinds. Look at us. One has many kinds. Look. Look. Remarkable, the many kinds. One has many kinds. Two have no duality. Two have no duality. Look into that one. It's looking into a really interesting point. In a way, it's saying that each thing, each of the infinite number of things, forms, beings, they each report exactly back to an undivided reality. And each one of them presents that undivided reality. The indivisible. Then the next line, at the horizon the sun rises, the moon sets. This impermanent, wonderfully changing reality. This impermanent universe is like this. Moon sets here, sun rises there. Sun sets here, moon rises there. Child is born. Child, adult, elderly person dies. It's like this. It is. Then this image of looking out over, before the balustrade, the mountains deepen and the water chills. I'm reluctant to tamper with this presentation of, you could say, the deep acceptance of life and death, the deep acceptance of how things move, what they move towards, and how graciously we can agree to move with them. And then the beautiful question, which is also its own answer. When consciousness ends in the skull, how can joy exist? What is joy apart from or outside of this opening beyond the small, self-enclosed one? You know, joy refuses nothing. That sense of including is the rich creative act. It is the expression of joy, fearless joy, prepared to include even the difficult, the threatening, the challenging. So this very move of the heart and mind that is not knowing, that is intimate with what is happening, that is instinctively disliking any form of picking apart the world, the wholeness of the world. Atmosphere, another very short poem. And since makes it very clear what this involves. It's called I Am Filled with Love. She says, I am filled with love as a great tree with the wind, as a sponge with the ocean, as a great life with suffering, as time with death. Look how radically and profoundly including that is. That sense of love as complete acceptance, unqualified approach to what is. So we end up in the lap of this very delicate, subtle kind of joy. Or even if joy's too much, what about something like reasonable contentment? Because that's where this not knowing mind, this reliable doubt takes us, where we doubt our opinions, doubt our picking and choosing, doubt our choosing, and instead choose what is, exactly what is. It is not knowing that releases us from the confines of the skull. Remember, I spoke this morning of when I look inside, I see that I am no thing. That is wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that is love. Between the two, my life moves. But can you, by now, this end of the talk, can you feel inside and outside healing into each other without any need to hold them apart, to feel that there is something apart there? So, in short, this is the simple, everyday, supreme way of becoming real. One continuous reunion with reality. Thank you for your trouble.